Today we're going to learn how to add fractions. So what I have here is 3/4 and 7/8. Let's say you had a pizza party and one of your friends ate 3/4 of a pizza and the other friend ate 7/8 of a pizza. And you wanted to know how much pizza they had eaten altogether. In this case, because we're using fraction circles, we could just check it by moving these over here, filling in that one, and we would see that it was 1 whole one and 5/8 left over. But usually we are not using fraction circles, so let's see what we have to do. When adding fractions, you do need to have the same denominator. So just like we've been doing, we've been converting so that they have the same denominator. You have to do that before you can add your fractions. So let's look at these denominators. We have a 4 and an 8. So we know that 8 is divisible by 4, so let's convert them both to 8ths. So when we do that, this one we don't have to do anything to because it's already an 8th. This one, we multiplied the 4 times 2 to get 8, so we need to do the same thing to the numerator. 3 times 2 is 6. So now that they are both in 8ths, we can add them together. If you were to do this with the fraction circles, you would trade in your 4ths for 8ths. So I'll just do that so you can picture it. And you would have 6/8. So now when you went to compare, you can add them together. Now, when you add fractions, you only add the numerator. You never add the denominator because the denominator is telling you what the fraction is. It's saying how, the top says how many of these you have. So in this case, you have 6/8, and in this case, you have 7/8. When you add them together, you only add the numerators. So 6 plus 7 is 13. So you would have 13/8. However, we're not finished because we don't like to leave any answers as an improper fraction. So you would take that 13/8. Let me just erase this so I have more space. You would take the 13/8 and convert it to a mixed number. How do we do that? 13 divided by 8, or 8 goes into 13 how many times? 1 time, with how many left over? So let's do a few questions from the textbook, page 302. The first question shows something like this. Now I've drawn it, so it's not going to be exact, but the first thing you have to do is decide what fraction is being represented here. How many pieces have they divided this into? They've divided it into 5 pieces. So this has been divided into 5ths, and 2 of those pieces are colored in. So we have 2/5. Over here, they've divided it into 10 pieces. So these are 10ths, and 5 of those pieces are colored in. So we have 5 and a 10 in the denominator, and we need to convert them both to the same denominator. So if you look at this, we could leave this one because we know that 5 and 10 work together. So we can leave that one alone, and we'll convert this one to 10ths. What did you do to get from 5 to 10? Times 2. So you need to do the same thing to the numerator, times 2. 2 times 2 is 4. Now when we add, like I mentioned before, we don't add the denominators because the denominator just tells us what it is we're adding, and we are adding 10ths. So now we have 4/10 plus 5/10, and that is 9/10. If you wanted to see what it would look like visually, it would be as if you took a line and divided this into 10ths, and now you have 1, 2, 3, 4/10. Let's look at question 3 on page 302. 3a is pretty straightforward. It says 2/3 plus 1/3. Remember, we don't add the denominators, we just add the numerators. So 2 plus 1 is 3. And when we have 3/3, we have 1 whole. So we don't leave it like that. We convert it to a whole number and we'll just call it 1. The next one, there's no converting necessary. Whenever the two denominators are the same, you don't need to convert anything. It's a gimme. 3 plus 2 is 5. So we have 5/4, but we don't want to leave it as an improper fraction. So we'll convert it. 4 goes into 5 one time with 1 left over. So our answer is 1 1/4. The next one, though, we notice that the denominators are not the same. So we do need to convert, and you do need to show your work. So what I would expect to see would be that you converted them both to something similar. What would it be? Well, let's count by 2's. 2, 4, 6, 8. Count by 3's. 3, 6, 9. You should have noticed that there was a 6 in both of those. So let's convert them both to 6ths. So what did I do to get from 2 to 6? I multiplied it by 3. So I need to do the same thing to the numerator. So 1 times 3 is 3. What did I do to get from 3 to 6? I multiplied it by 2. So I need to do the same to the numerator. 2 times 2 is 4. Now I can add these up. 3 6 plus 4 6 equals 7 6's. But like I mentioned before, we don't like to leave it as an improper fraction. So what we'll do is we'll keep going. We have 7 6. We're going to convert it to a mixed number. And it would be 1 1/6 for your answer. Let's skip down to question 9 on page 303. The question says, each guest at Ty's birthday party brought 1 gift. The graph shows the gifts that Ty received. So you'll have to look at your graph. What fraction of the gifts were toys or books? So when you look at the graph, you'll see that the toys are 5/12. So I'm going to write down 5/12. And the books are 1/3. Now I need to add these together. They have different denominators, so I need to convert. If you think about it, you know that 3 goes into 12 evenly, so we'll just leave the 12 alone, 5/12, and we will convert the thirds to 12ths. So what did you do to get from 3 to 12? Times 4. So you need to do the same thing to the numerator, times 4, and you're going to get 4/12. So now we can add them up. They are both 12ths. 5 plus 4 equals 9. So the answer would be 9/12. Now don't forget, for a word problem, you do need a sentence. So you would say 9/12 of the gifts were toys or books. The next part of A says what fraction of the gifts were games or puzzles. And if you look at the graph, the games were 1/6 and the puzzles were 1/12. So again, we know that 12 is divisible by 6, so we can leave that one alone. We'll convert them both to 12ths. Don't need to do anything to this one because it's already in the 12ths. What did we do to get from 6 to 12? We multiplied it by 2. So we need to do the same thing to the numerator. 1 times 2 is 2. Now we can add those up. 2/12 plus 1/12 equals 3/12. But I want to ask you something. Is that in simplest form? Let's think back to what it means to be in simplest form. Simplest form means you can't divide it any further. And you should know from your divisibility rules that 12 is divisible by 3. So let's do that. 3 divided by 3 is 1, and 12 divided by 3 is 4. So your answer would be 1/4 of the gifts were games or puzzles. And don't forget to put a sentence for your word problems.